And we are live. I have candidate for the Douglas by-election on the 27th of August, not too far away. I've got Lon Pinkerton. So good evening, Lon.
Good evening, Jed.
So you're not really able to get out and about, are you, at the moment, due to quarantine, is it? You're in isolation?
Yeah, unfortunately, my father-in-law passed away suddenly a few weeks ago after I announced my candidacy. And obviously, my family were overtaken by events, really. So we just returned last night to the island from Slovakia, overnighting in the UK as well in London. And I'll be self-quarantining till a week on Sunday, pretty much. Thanks for giving me the platform to get my message out and about. Really appreciate that, Jed.
Well, it's good for people to connect with their candidates in the Douglas by-election. It is, it really is a big deal in Manx politics, isn't it, at the moment? Because there's a lot of uncertainty around, I think, in not just Douglas, but on the island about the future. And it seems, I've looked at your media, your interviews with Paul Moulton and on 3FM, you seem like you're very passionate about fixing things and making it fair. Would that summarise it?
Yeah, I think with my background, it's fair to say that I come from a very working class sort of background, starting off in Ramsey, which is where I was brought up. Always sort of try and make sure that everybody's treated exactly the same, which is why I've put out my social media this week my belief in democracy. Everybody has an equal vote if they use it. So it doesn't matter whether you're a millionaire or you don't earn very much money. You've got an equal say in the democratic process. And I hope to raise awareness as part of this campaign with the by-election to hopefully persuade everybody, not just in Douglas South, but across the island, to register to vote, because I believe it's really important that people reconnect with the democratic process. I think from what I started to do a few weeks ago before I left the island, I spoke to a few ladies down in Rose, and it was it was not a rude awakening, but it was a reminder to me that politicians sometimes come across as being disingenuous. People are fed up of listening to people making promises that they can't keep. And hopefully, I haven't made any promises that I know I wouldn't keep, but I'm definitely on the side of the public services and what you would call democratic socialism, basically, for the want of a better word, if you want to sort of put a flag on top of it.
That's interesting to hear. So we'll talk about equality, and we'll talk about, say, the level of taxation, for instance, across the island. Yeah. How does it sit with you? Is it fair?
I think we've got some way to go to redistribute some of the wealth. Obviously, with COVID-19, I've made a big sort of splash about that a few weeks ago. And I, having been across now in the UK for a few days, either side of travelling to Slovakia, I think we're a long way from being in what they're terming the new normal. I think unemployment, the figures came out today, so we're currently at 1,100 registered unemployed, and the ILO estimate is just over 2,140, which basically means that 5% of the population at the moment out of work, basically, by their estimate. I think those figures are going to increase once the salary support things aren't in place. I was in touch with somebody who I used to work with a few years ago today in the hospitality sector, and they're very worried about their long-term future going forward. The taxi driver who picked us up at the airport last night, he's had to take on a second job just to make ends meet. So I think we've got a long way, and we're just at the start of this process. I don't think there's any short-term fix to where anybody's got a magic wand and can make promises or commitments that everything's going to be rosy in the garden anytime soon. I think things could get steadily worse also as we go into the autumn time if there is a second lockdown. Whereas before we had the good spring weather, we could get out in our gardens, although we weren't seeing people like we normally would do, I worry about the full impact on people's mental health, especially during the autumn and winter time. And the forecast and the focus is on a potential second wave of the coronavirus. So bearing that in mind, I still think we're going to feel a lot of pain before things get better, to be honest.
I hear that, and surprisingly though, I'm also hearing that our housing market is very buoyant at present, and we're hearing news that we've got residents coming to live on the Isle of Man, and then on the other hand we've got, say, up to 2,000 people unemployed in the next few months. But that has happened before. I think in 2012 we got up to 2,000, but there seems to be mixed messages. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think this is the problem. It's hard to sort of flag down and say this is where we are at any given time. I mean, the rate of recovery back to normality is going to take a long time to get there. I was just looking at the graphs just before I came onto you, and I think the way things are going, if it levels out, and then it starts peaking again with the likes of people not going to university, maybe as a result of their A-level results, also concerns about living in the UK. But in terms of people coming to live here, the island is obviously quite an attractive place to come to at the moment, bearing in mind that there's no positive cases for, are we in the 86th day now? I've sort of lost track of time, to be honest, because being away, I've been in my own little bubble for the last few weeks. So, I think people will still want to come to the island, and it is a good place to live. I make no bones about it. I shared a photograph off a website the other day of sunrise over Douglas Bay, and I basically put, there's no better place to live, and I firmly believe the island as a whole, once we get through the pandemic situation, which will take us some time, you wouldn't want to live anywhere else. You really wouldn't want to live anywhere else. And I can understand why people would want to come here to settle down.
So how are we going to deal with housing and affordability and what's happening with public housing? Because I think the rules are changing again soon for tenancies, but we do have a problem with our young people in that how can they afford to put is it a 15% mortgage now that they're putting down, which could be 30 grand?
Well, we live in a Douglas Corporation house up in Annika. We were on a waiting list for a number of years. My wife decided to re-enter the workplace last year once our daughter reached 3 years of age. So she has a part-time job. I work full-time up at Manx Utilities. So we live in Annika. We were lucky. We were on the housing list for about 4 or 5 years. My actual background is that I was brought up in a commissioner's house in Ramsey, so I know that sort of side of the market. I know how difficult it is for people to get, like I said, deposit down on our house, and how it's going to be affordable. One of the other things recently, I was invited to the Private Landlords Association meeting just to do with the consultation recently. I don't know if you're aware of the public consultation there. And one of the things that I think is unfair, as the government are setting in stone new legislation for private landlords, it's not doing the same for the public sector. And I think that's unfair, putting that burden of expense on the private landlord, whereas the public landlord, government and the commissioners and local authorities seem to not have to make that investment. But in terms of where we go from here, I know the government recovery fund, the £100 million fund they've got set aside, there'll be some investment there to get the housing market going again. But again, with unemployment figures the way they are, the uncertainty of work, it's going to have a massive effect on the younger generation. And I think it's a rude awakening for a lot of people in the millennial generation, where they haven't sort of seen this level of fear and exposure to people saying no. You're going to have to make stark choices, whereas people have always had an expectation of how things are. They're going to have to adjust their mindset to accept things that aren't going to be there in the shorter term.
So you've identified that there must be opportunities for growing employment on the island, but how are we going to do that? Is it going to be through the finance sector or tourism, or is anything else leaping out?
This is a good area for me. I've basically worked in HR for the last 5 years, and I must have sat in on around about 1,000 candidate interviews for vacancies, and understanding what motivates people to apply for certain jobs at certain times. I think now, whereas you might have 5 or 10 people for a specialist vacancy, you're going to have 100 people applying, basically because of uncertainties in the workforce they're in. In terms of creating new jobs, like I say, the Recovery Fund will go some way to doing that with the construction sector, some public services sectors as well. We probably lose quite a lot of people in the hospitality industry, because if we don't get the tourism sector going again next year, say for example if the TT didn't happen, I know there's a question mark on the Island Games participation next year as well. These are things that will have a knock-on effect. Obviously the Douglas Prom scheme has had an impact on the hoteliers and the shopkeepers down on that area. I know there's concerns about how that is impacting. But at the moment, with the borders being closed and being at the stage 4 level of the border framework, which I completely agree with, even though obviously at the moment it's having an effect on my own sort of situation. But it's the same for everybody. You know, I was on a plane last night coming back with about 25, 30 people, and we're all in the same, you know, situation. We've got to then close ourselves off, and I firmly agree with that. You know, having spent, like I say, a little time in the UK, and watching, you know, it literally is like something out of a zombie movie. That's the only way I can describe it. I've described it like that to a couple of people I've spoken to today. There's that fear of being anywhere. I mean, for example, when I arrived at Stansted Airport the other night, all the cash machines were closed down. You couldn't even get cash out anymore. You know, things that we took for granted 6 months ago are just, it's an unprecedented time. And I know I've used that phrase in other interviews as well, but it really is worrying, and how we get out of it, because we are literally living in our own little bubble at the moment, and things, you know, are bad. You know, we had 24 deaths, we had 336 cases positively tested, but there's all those other, you know, knock-on effects on, you know, people's education.
Well, if we could just move and have a look at the financial side, and the Isle of Man is one of the world's richest nations. We hear about that. What's your understanding or confidence in the amount of money or reserves that we've got?
Again, it falls down to the distribution of wealth for me. I mean, the statistics in last year's earnings survey were that 1 in 6 people earn below the living wage. And if we're supposed to be in the top 10 of the financial countries in the world, where is the money going? You know, I mean, I am a really committed advocate for people having equality and having a safety net at the bottom of the social structure, as it were, in terms of money, that people are that. And I think this is where my experience could help. I'm not anti-business, I'm not anti-market forces in that respect, but I just feel that sometimes people do get a little bit left behind and forgotten about. I mean, there's food poverty, there's fuel poverty issues as well. And I was disappointed to see that the Department of Education the other week put out a press release announcing that hot school dinners were going up by 5 pence, but it would only equate to an average of £9.75 per child per year, at a time when people are literally scraping, you know, at a certain level just to afford to live. I mean, our children have lost part of their education as well over the last 6 months. You know, there's a bit of uncertainty about if there is a second lockdown, another effect, what that's going to be. But I hope that in Douglas South, people realise that I understand that there are genuine issues for people at the low income side of the scale. But, you know, having said that, I'm not anti-business. I saw a comment that people thought I was anti-business, which isn't the case. I actually had my own business for a year a number of years ago, back in Ramsey. So I'm not anti-business at all. I just want to make sure that people get a fair crack of the whip and don't get left behind, basically.
Well, you mentioned there about the school dinner issue, and we know about bus fares rising, and we know that those who are struggling seem to be facing real challenges at the moment. And yet, how many MHKs can you think of in the House of Keys that are actually talking about this? How many MHKs are really sharing their opinions and views with the public?
This is one of the reasons why I decided to stand, and it was basically a conversation with a good friend of mine. I'm going to name check him, so I hope he's watching. Chap I work with called Carl Roberts. I knew I was at some point going to stand in the future, and this came, obviously, sadly, because of Bill Malarkey's death, and then Kate Costain stepping down. And we were having a conversation a few weeks ago, and it was actually him who actually said to me, well, when is the right time? And I said, well, there's never a right time. So, but that was one of the main reasons why I decided to stand, was because I know what I can do on these issues for people who do struggle. And some of the things, there's a Timwell question paper for tomorrow with 102 questions on it. And I fully believe that, the government should be held to account. But how many of the questions actually get to that bottom line of, we're there to serve the people? One of the things that I'm deliberately not trying to do is just take cheap pot shots at the government, because in the situation we're in, I think everybody is trying their best and trying to make a sense of where we're going to. And I understand all that. I don't disagree. I don't agree with everything that the government does. Obviously, because of my situation working within the government system, I think I'm one of the only candidates who has a little booklet of 17 pages of what I can and can't say. So I have to be, be quite careful of not criticising too much, really, to be honest. But again, we're in unprecedented times, and I just feel that because of my experience and my background and my understanding, I've got a young daughter. She starts school in September. And my wife works at, as I say, part-time at one of the schools in the area. I think I've got a lot to offer people, and I can understand what their needs, their fears are. And I genuinely, without sounding cheesy, because it probably does sound cheesy, but I genuinely think I can help people. I really do.
I'm sure you're well known in the neighbourhood, so you are living in the constituency, which is a big help.
Yes.
And soon, I hope you'll be able to be a bit more visible out on the streets. But you've got people campaigning for you, yeah? You've got people campaigning for you.
Oh, absolutely. My brother's been out and about, and he's been out around Paul Rose and Annika and speaking to people on my behalf, and I'd like to thank him for doing that. Another friend of mine and his family have been out as well, up around Farm Hill, Cops Hill, all that sort of area, over the last couple of weeks. So I really appreciate everybody's help.
So tell me what's
on the way. I really do.
What kind of issues are they being faced with on the doorsteps? What are people talking about?
The main thing that's come back loud and clear, especially from the sort of the Annika and Paul Rose area, is they want people who go in there and will get them. They don't want somebody pussyfooting about and making promises they can't keep, which is basically the message that I would have expected to hear. I mean, I had made a start walking around Annika just before everything happened, and I got that loud and clear on the first couple of days I was out and about then. And that's just been reinforced when people have been talking to my brother, Russell, about everything. And Brian, my friend, who's been up around the top end of Farm Hill and everything, he said it was pretty much the same sort of things from people there, worried about COVID, worried about job security, interest rates, for mortgages and things like that. Because obviously the financial markets are very volatile. Anyway, they could go either way. You think back to the 2008 financial crisis, and at the end of the day, it was the taxpayer, it was me and you, and the workers who basically bailed the banks out. So we have had a rough time of it in the past, but again, I still think we don't know the full implication of what's on the horizon, to be honest.
So whilst you're at home, you'll have a bit of screen time, no doubt. Do you follow
Yes.
The local media? So you'd have like the Facebook News and Politics, Manx forums.
Yes.
Would you dip into those?
On my Facebook page, to be honest, I don't use Twitter. I've got Facebook, and I've got all the main sort of news feeds coming in. I saw there was a new radio station the other day, Sound Radio.
Yeah.
So I followed them the other day as well. Other things like the MHKs, they work for you. Are you aware of their site as well?
Yeah.
So I follow that sort of thing. In terms of Manx forums, I saw on there the other week that people were speculating about my salary and how is it right that a man who was on... Yeah. So somebody must have confused me with somebody else, because apparently I was on 70,000 a year,
all right, living
at the taxpayer's expense. Which, if I was on 70,000 a year, I wouldn't take a pay cut to become HK. and I actually, somebody actually asked me the question on in relation to the 3FM video, if I was on a minimum wage, would I still want to be an MHK? And my answer was, this isn't about the money. It genuinely isn't. My career, for those people who know me, money isn't the motivating factor. But Manx forums have got some very interesting stories on, and if people hide behind sort of these sort of things, assumed names, shall we say?
Yeah, I think there is a place for it. There is a place for it, and as long as it's not too offensive or defamatory or improper,
absolutely.
And
absolutely.
You kind of wonder. You kind of wonder where these people are, who they are, but it is interesting.
I mean, you look at somebody who's embraced social media, like Derek Flint, for example.
Yeah.
I think Derek would make a fantastic candidate at the next general election if he sought office. You need people who've come from that sort of background. Another example, a person I know quite well, Andy Cowie, who's the chairman of Ramsey Commissioners.
Yeah.
I think he would be an absolutely superb MHK. And he'd do a great deal for the people of Ramsey. I look back to the politicians, in the most recent past. You look at what Alan Bell did for raising the profile of LGBT rights, and also the president of Tynwald at the time, who was Claire Christian, not to be confused with the Claire Christian of this election. But I know Claire over the years, and she was very much at the forefront of progressive views at the time in support of what Alan was doing. And I think where we've come as a society in the last 30 or so years, you're safe now to be a gay or a bisexual or a lesbian in our society. The Black Lives Matter march the other week, in a wider social context, we're not really an island community like we were. And I think that these politicians, like I say, like Alan and Claire, what they did in raising people's awareness and getting laws changed is to be applauded. And that may be one of the reasons why people want to come to the island these days as well, is that we are a more inclusive society. I mean, my wife, although she's a British citizen now, she came over in the mid-2000s from Slovakia as an au pair. And, she came over basically because her sister lived here, and, for me, the rest is history, basically. I'm glad she did come. But, if we're an island that welcomes people and makes people feel included, all the better. But in terms of other sort of influences, rather than just the Manx media, are you aware of the journalist John Pilger and his work? Yeah. So he's been a massive influence on my outlook towards social justice issues and, sort of raising a lid on the bad side of government, internationally. Also, the documentaries of Adam Curtis, the filmmaker, the BBC. Yeah. Trying to get behind that sort of level of what really goes on and what really happens in the business world. He's made some fantastic, and I if anybody's interested, I would definitely tell them to check out his work. So in that context, I've always had an eye on the sort of the international political scene as well.
You've identified that the Isle of Man is a safe place to live. It's friendly. We've got this community. A lot of the community does revolve around social media. I wish we could come clean about the power of Facebook, say, on the island. Because let's face it, if you're looking to find someone, you don't look in the telephone directory now. You just try and find them on Facebook, and you've probably got 6 mutual friends.
Well, that's what I did the other day. Funnily enough, in Stansted, when I was looking to book a taxi to come back last night, I typed in Isle of Man airport taxi, and the first name that came up, I got in contact with him. And he was really a fellow called Andy. Funnily enough, he was from Slovakia as well. And that's how I wouldn't go at the Yellow Pages these days like I would have done in the old days. You're quite right. The power of it. That movie, The Social Network, that came out about 10 years ago. Fantastic movie about how Facebook was started, and the sort of the way it's evolved over the years is it's frightening because your whole life is there for everybody to read, really.
True, but I'm surprised that it's not really been picked up on, that it probably contributes to having a lower crime rate, and the Isle of Man is a safer place, because if anything happens, it's straight on Facebook, isn't it? And it's right round the community.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, this is the thing. It's the more we communicate with each other, and the more we understand who we are, and what we want, and what we need. It can only be a good thing. The communication side of it is excellent. The way that the government's embraced it as well to get its message across is to be applauded, I believe. Obviously, that, like I say, that there are a few issues, where people are, not playing with a straight bat, shall we say. But that's very few and far between. Very few and far between.
So, if we talk about law and order on the Isle of Man, do you see any major issues?
Somebody was asking me today about my view about medical cannabis, which sort of led me back into the law and order thing. So where I would stand on things like, and I include alcohol in this, I think we could do a lot more to try and help people recover from substance abuse, because substance abuse also leads to other forms of crime, I believe. Now, people have to take their own personal responsibility for their actions. I fully accept that. But in terms of law and order, I think the crime rate during the COVID lockdown was lower than it had been in certain instances, but in other instances there had been a slight spike, which obviously, if you have people locked in close together for a long period of time, that can happen. But where we move on from there, like I say, somebody like Derek Flint, who was a professional police officer for a number of years, he might be able to bring something to the table, at the next general election as well. That's to be applauded.
He's got stiff competition with the Doctor and Laurie up in Ramsey, but fair play to Derek. I mean, what he does, he's open, he posts under his own name, and he's not afraid to speak his mind, which is good. And fair play to Derek. So
about 7 months ago, I was on a government forum to do with social media when we were the Water and Sewerage Authority, just prior to the Manx Utilities merger. And Derek sat on there on behalf of the police. I think Catherine Bradley came to a few of those as well. I think Catherine, I would assume as well. Yeah. And Daphne Kane, actually, at the time, she worked at Heritage Railways, I think. And then she obviously became an MHK. Alistair Ramsey was the chairman of it as well. He would pop in and out of this meeting. So even back in those days, there was a good understanding of how the social media side worked and getting the message out. And Derek was definitely one of those people that I thought had a really good handle on the power of it and how to get the message across.
It is.
So again, like I say, his experience would be really good.
Does it ever surprise you though that we do have these issues on the island and we don't have our current MHKs perhaps being a little bit more vocal? I know Laurie Hooper is very good and will examine, and I think if you look at the new Hansard, the order paper for tomorrow, so that's the questions, and you mentioned there's 102. And it would appear some very, very probing, what can I say, analysis by Chris Thomas, I think, is active.
I met Chris Thomas for the first time, actually, a few weeks ago after the Landlords Association meeting. And obviously, he's sort of parted ways with the government and become, sort of a de facto opposition, I think. Maybe, if you understand, from that point of view, we haven't got like an official opposition.
Yeah.
But obviously, because he's been involved at quite close quarters, I think he knows what questions to ask. And I think he definitely seems like one of those people who's doing it for the right reasons. I think sometimes some politicians maybe are using it for a nefarious purpose or to point score on things that maybe the public don't see. But I think in Chris Thomas's situation, he came across to me as a really genuinely concerned sort of guy who wants to do the right thing as well. And I certainly wouldn't label him as wasting people's time in terms of some of the questions asked. And I think, like you say, some of those questions that he's asking tomorrow, there's some very good questions there. It'll be interesting to read what the answers are.
It's quite an agenda because June Watterson is also batting that way. And I think there are some of the other MHKs who are now starting to... they're going to be questions posted perhaps on behalf of, people that live in their constituency. There does seem to be more examination because there was a huge paper at the last sitting, but also when you look at the Freedom of Information page, that seems to be bombarded now. So do you think there's a little bit of disquiet from the public?
I think people are now starting to realise that with the freedom of information especially, they do, and everybody has the right to probe, and everybody has the right to be heard. Obviously, there was the situation recently with Trevor Cowan at the Tynwald, where he was trying to put in some petitions of redress, but they weren't accepted and whatever.
Yeah.
Which to me, it ended up a bit messy, and I still can't quite get a handle on what really happened there. But obviously, at the end of the day, everybody's democratic right is their vote. Bearing in mind that there's an election next year, I'm not saying all politicians are just thinking about keeping their job, but I'm sure that does come into play, to be honest. I think, as we get closer to the next general election, I noticed today Jason Morehouse was starting to get a bit vocal about some issues as well with his page, and that's what they're there to do. They're there to represent the constituency. Just as if I'm successful, if I saw something in this constituency that was wrong, I'd wave a flag and say, what can we do about this to get it resolved? My approach is that I'd like to be able to be a conciliator. I've got mediation training as part of my job. I went to an ACAS seminar off Ireland last year to get a bit of training to do with mediation between you think of the teachers' dispute at the moment with the unions and things like that. I think maybe help there, my experience on that side of things. But certainly, I think I've got some ideas on where to go in the future. But again, I don't really want to, say too much at this stage because, I am sort of constrained by, being a public servant. I would never sort of, like, for example, say anything about Manx Utilities because, I work there, but if I became an MHK, some positions that I may hold that are different, for example, if I did, I'd be able to express them a lot more sort of succinctly, I would say.
It's a pity you can't have a free pass whilst you're canvassing to to say what you want, really, but I can understand it.
Well,
It may be that you have to go back to the office. Who knows? At some point.
well, I put a message out yesterday, and I actually rewrote it before I posted it because those people who know me quite well, I've, even in amongst the group of friends, if we're out watching a football match, for say example, right, on a night out, I'm always the one who takes the opposite view on what's going on to everybody else.
Yeah.
I'm usually quite outspoken. And one of my really good friends has actually said that, is this really you that's doing this? I said, well, everybody has their own opinion and everybody has the right to say what they feel. I just think at the moment, people should pull together rather than pull apart. Not to say, like I say, that, things like tomorrow's order paper and likes of Chris Thomas, they are asking the right question at the right time. I just like to think that if I am successful and whoever else would be successful going in, we could go in and help rather than hinder at the moment. And, I think that's one of my strengths is how to communicate with people, how to deal with people, and trying to give people a sense that, that they matter and that what they're saying to me, I can then take away and represent further, either in the House of Keys or in Tynwald or whatever their concerns are, to try and help them.
Well, just to finish off our chat, we'll steer away from politics. You just pricked something on my radar before about, you mentioned football, so you're a football fan, are you?
Well, unfortunately, the team that I support were knocked out of Europe last night.
Oh, right. Oh dear.
That might give you a bit of a hint.
Well, the night before it was, or a few nights before, it was City as well. So it's a bad time for Manchester on the football front over the weekend.
It is. I mean, I've got a lot of friends who are Liverpool fans, and genuinely, I can honestly say that they deserve the title this year. There was no question about that, even before the lockdown. They were running away with the title.
Yeah.
I actually flew over Anfield and Goodison last night. There was a gap in the clouds. It was really strange. You could see Goodison and Anfield sort of looking back at me, which I thought was an omen of things to come last night with the result, actually.
Oh, dear. So,
in all seriousness, I'm just a normal guy. I go out with my mates. Well, not as much as we used to, obviously, with the lockdown recently.
Yeah.
But I'll go down the pub to watch the football, quiz nights, movie nights.
Yeah.
I'm just a regular, normal guy who happens to read too much of the Hansard and the Tynwald order papers and bores them senseless when we're in the pub.
But someone's got to do it because there's so much material. There are so many decisions made, and things do kind of slip away, don't they? They're kicked into the long grass and they're forgotten about. And it's people like yourself who inquire and scrutinise, and now you're putting yourself up another level by putting your name on the card for a cross. The election in it's a week on Thursday, isn't it?
A week on Thursday, yeah.
A week on Thursday.
I ran originally in Ramsey a couple of years ago when there was a by-election there to be a commissioner. Because at that time, we weren't sure whether we were going to stay in Douglas living or move up north. But obviously, the election result there, I lost out on that. And that pretty much closed the door on, on that part of my life, really. With Ramsey was still where I was brought up. I love going there and seeing everybody, my friends and family up there. But we're centred now. We're rooted in the constituency. This opportunity arose once Kate stepped down. I just feel that I've been in government almost 30 years. I've been around a lot of departments. Currently working at Manx Utilities. Somebody actually said to me as well, do you think you could go in there and make a difference? And I said, I genuinely do, because I think sometimes you have to take a different view to those around you to maybe persuade them to take the different view. The 12 Angry Men scenario, for example, the movie. So I think I could bring a bit of that and just a different approach to dealing with people's problems. Maybe because I would be going in fresh. And at the end of the day, it's a year's term for now. So if people are thinking of the longer term, if I'm successful, I'd stand again anyway. For sure, it's that I'm at that stage of my life now where it's the right thing to do. Moving on, basically, and hopefully I'll wake up on the 28th of August. Still in quarantine. Hasten to add until a couple of days after then.
Right.
But at least then I could have that certainty that I could make a difference for people. Basically.
So really, with you being housebound now, you've got to really govern your social media opportunities, I guess, haven't you? That's going to be your best opportunity to platform what you're trying to do.
Basically, I suspended everything out of respect to my father-in-law after his death for about 6 days until we had the funeral, basically, till the middle of that week when we were away. And then I started slowly posting bits and pieces. And then in the morning, I wake up every morning pretty much with a different sort of subject that I want to talk about. And then this afternoon, I've been invited to a recognition meeting on Thursday night at School of Algeciras, which obviously I can't attend, but I've prepared a statement that's going to be read out by the Mayor of Douglas. So I still will be able to participate. But again, I'm exactly the same as any other person that was on that plane last night. I knew that by coming back, I'd have these two weeks of self-isolation. I just need to make the best of this period, like you say, with the social media. Speaking to somebody like yourself, there's a Manx radio thing next week where they're going to hook me up somehow remotely as well, which is basically what you're doing with now as well. But unfortunately for the requisition meeting, that hasn't been possible. So I've done a prepared statement, and then I'll use my social media platform to answer any of the questions that the other candidates do on the night. And again, each one of the candidates, whoever you vote for in the end, we have to persuade you, the electorate, that we have the answers to the questions you want to ask. Because at the end of the day, it's a big vote of confidence in the individual from people that they give them their vote, and I really do believe that democracy is the most important thing in this. It doesn't matter what your political philosophy is beyond that. Once you put your cross against the name, that you've then got a duty to those people that have put you there to do what's best for them and the rest of the constituency. There was only a 40% turnout last time, and I really want to raise that awareness to people that this is your chance to make that difference with what you want to say, basically. And hopefully, like I say, some people may see what I've done so far and think, I can give it a go next time. I've name checked a few people earlier on who I think would be good in another constituency. I genuinely believe that there are a lot of people out there who can make that difference.
I do think that with the 10 candidates, is it 10? Is it 10, I think?
10.
Yeah. So I think we will have a big turnout. Yeah. We will have a big turnout. Yeah. And I'm just thinking, you must be in a very unique position. You must be one of the few people on the planet who is aiming to be elected, and they're in quarantine and running a campaign whilst they're confined to barracks. Yeah. So it's I'm surprised that hasn't been picked up on, really. I think that's quite an interesting story. So hopefully that can be
I remember going to vote for Alan Bell back in 2006 at the town hall in Ramsey, and it was quite early in the morning, and I was standing up with my mother, and I was then going off to work, so we were there literally just after 8 o'clock, and a couple of places in front of us in the queue, I think was the first person to vote who was 16 years of age. With that person making history then, people forget the Isle of Man was the first place that gave, women the vote as well. Yeah. So, we've got this history of democracy going back, to 979 with the first sitting of the Tynwald there. But it's what we do with that democracy. It's making it work for all people, not just certain sectors of society, And I hope, by what I've said tonight, anybody that might have thought that I'm sort of, trying to drag us back to the 1970s and industrial disputes and et cetera, it's not about, harking back to the past. It's how we can make social justice work for the future, how we include everybody in society, not just those who can provide for themselves, but those, who may be retired. The thing about license fees and things, it beggars belief to me that, we're having these conversations about things like that. It just isn't right. The pensions situation as well, I feel very strongly about,
so
pension rights and everything. Well,
you were talking about license fees, the BBC license fee for the over 75s. Yeah. I think that will cost 450 grand, I think, to avoid that. So would that be money well spent? The Isle of Man could afford that?
I'm not just talking about the island. I'm talking about as a general principle that once people reach a certain age and they're not economically active and they're on a small income, why they have to pay the same license fee as somebody who earns, I don't know, 125 grand a year living in a house. Similar thing with the rate system. I think the rate system needs to be looked at again. It always seems to be kicked into the long grass just before the election comes up for the next administration to look at. Local authorities, do we really need all the local authorities on the island?
Exactly.
Those are the other subjects that I could, at any other time would be at the top of my agenda, really. But at the moment, it's to do with COVID and how we steer our way into the future, basically. Because we are literally, and like I said before, having been away to the UK, we don't realise how lucky we are in the bubble we're in at the moment. And, we are pretty free to go about our daily business. Once I come out of quarantine, I know I'll be able to go down to Tesco and do my shopping and, hopefully not have to go back to work and start as an MHK. But genuinely, we live in a great place. And I think that's the thing. You take for granted so many things. And the one thing I learned during the original lockdown period was it narrowed my focus to what's really important: your family, your health, and your happiness. And with those three things, as long as those three things are in place, everything else really should fall into place for you, given a fair wind, so.
Well, I think we're just hitting 47 minutes of chat.
Okay.
Believe it or not, that's flown by, and it's been interesting to speak to you. I think anyone watching this will see a bit more about Lon and just understand what you're about. Obviously, it'll go on to YouTube. Feel free to make any comments in the section, and I'm sure it can be shared far and wide. We'll be speaking to other candidates. We've done Mr. Josem already. We'll do yourself, and I think I've got HM Soul, His Majesty, is coming up soon. So I
have to say, I must admit, I have to take issue with his claim to the throne because I actually know. No, seriously, I know who the proper King of Man was, and he sadly passed away last year. It was my brother-in-law's dad, character from Spring Valley called Kelly Hunt. Now, when I was younger, I remember going down to Tynwald, and there was two guys. There was Kelly and another guy who dressed up like the Vikings as the Kings of Man.
Yeah.
And Kelly was quite a renowned figure around the Paul Rose area because he lived down Spring Valley. And even up until the last couple of years, every year he'd turn up in his Viking uniform as the King of Man. So I feel very strongly on that. For me, Kelly will always be and should be remembered as the King of Man.
So
that's all I'm going to say on that one.
There you have it. You heard it. It's been broadcasted online. Kelly was the King of Man, and quite right.
Yeah, well, my brother-in-law and I were talking actually while we were in Slovakia, and I said, if I get in, maybe I could try and get his claim to the crown sort of sorted out, and we had a bit of a giggle about that, because obviously the last few weeks have been been rather few and far between on humour.
I'm sure. And
but yeah, what this has really taught me recently is, and I'd say this to anybody out there: if it doesn't matter what you want to do, whatever dream you want to follow, just do it. You don't get a second chance sometimes in this life. You've got to put yourself forward. One thing I've just remembered, somebody who I work with at work very closely, I won't mention her name, I don't want to embarrass her. She actually pulled me to one side the other week and said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And this was a couple of days just before my father-in-law passed away, knowing the pressure of what the job would bring and everything else. And the answer I gave to her was, and it resonates with me now, obviously, because my father-in-law's passing, is that, sometimes you only get one chance to have a go at it. And who knows, this time next year at the general election, there might not be a chance, for whatever reason. So I've just got to embrace the time, like I'm spending with you, and as I say, putting out my little social media things. If anybody's watching and they want to follow my social media, I'm on Facebook as Lon Pinkerton, Douglas South by-election 2020. My email address, if you want to email me, is lpinko@manx.net. And my personal mobile number, if you want to get in touch, is 336 272. And like I say, I'm just a normal guy who just thinks, I want to have a go at this. And if people like what I'm saying, hopefully they'll trust me enough to give me their vote.
Excellent. I'd say you're way above just a normal guy. You're admirable for taking up the challenge. And I've got to say, well, thank you very much. And hopefully we'll talk again sometime. But fair play to you.
I hope so. Yeah. Nice talking to you. And I wish you all the success with your online stuff. Now I know what you do, and I can have a look at some of this stuff. And,
excellent. Excellent.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks for your time, Jed.
All right.
Cheers.